What is up, guys? It's the Football Slayer here, back again to slay another terrible take from the pitch side, specifically focusing in on Tom Garrat and his takes. I feel like Tom Garrat is a respectable pundit. He gives pretty decent football takes, but I think there's times where he tries to stand out, he tries to be different, and he kind of goes on these tangents that don't really make too much sense, and they really end up being pretty bad takes. I want to focus in on this first clip where he's talking about Jonathan David in comparison to Victor Gyokeres. Listen in real quick.
Why haven't you gone in? Why haven't you gone in for Ollie Watkins? Why haven't you? Who did we mention earlier?
Who did we mention earlier?
Who was we on about earlier? Why haven't you gone in for John Duran? He's on to Fenerbahce.
Jonathan David.
Yet again, I don't understand Arsenal's transfer method here.
Okay, so from that clip, you could see Tom Garrat discuss why not sign Jonathan David. He even throws in a John Duran. I'm not even going to focus on that. John Duran had half of a good season for Aston Villa, then went to Saudi, and now is going to go sign for Fenerbahce. He doesn't really care about football, or if he does, he's going to have to prove otherwise. If he did, he wouldn't have just moved to Saudi. He would have fought for his place at Aston Villa and then secured a move somewhere else. But I want to focus on the why not sign Jonathan David. Gyokeres is literally better than Jonathan David at every single offensive stat. And if you don't believe me, I'm popping up right now on the screen. Here's a side-by-side comparison of their stats. Victor Gyokeres versus Jonathan David. He is literally better than Jonathan David at every single offensive stat other than pass completion, which nobody cares about, especially when you're talking about strikers. And I know the narrative will instantly go to, well, one plays in the French league and one plays in the Portuguese league. That's not fair. They play in relatively the same level league. There are people that think the French league is better than the Portuguese league. There are people that think the Portuguese league is better than the French league. They're relatively the same level. And if you don't believe me, you can even focus in on Champions League. The Champions League this year, Portuguese teams went up against French league teams about 4 or 5 times, and every game either finished in favor of the Portuguese league teams, or they finished in a draw. I could focus in on these. So Sporting actually played against Lille, where Jonathan David literally plays in the Champions League. In that game, Gyokeres scored a goal and Sporting won 2-0, while Jonathan David was hooked off in the 60th minute and was one of the lowest rated players on his team. And then just for Benfica, another team from the Portuguese league and their Champions League campaign, they beat Monaco in the knockout stages to advance and go play Barcelona, which they gave a good fight. And then also beat Monaco in the group stage for good measure. So I just want that narrative to instantly be debunked. They're relatively the same level league, and if we're speaking especially recently, yes, I'm not going to argue. The French league has PSG. They're a powerhouse. They just won the Champions League. Every team outside of that, they're relatively the same level of a league. And now I just want to focus in on Jonathan David. Jonathan David scored 16 goals in the same quality league as Portugal. And Tom is questioning why Arsenal and other teams aren't just going to try and sign Jonathan David. Gyokeres just scored 40 goals in his league. These aren't comparable numbers. And the funny thing is there really is no narrative for Jonathan David, because now the narrative against Gyokeres is, yes, his movement is elite. Yes, he's amazing at progressive carries. Yes, he's a physical specimen that we haven't seen in years. Maybe you can compare him to almost like Erling Haaland in terms of physicality. But he's not that great in the air. That's even Tom, I think, says it in this video. He's not that great in the air, and Arsenal's going to play low blocks. Yeah, well, neither is the 5'10" Jonathan David, who scored a whopping one-headed goal this season. So again, you don't want to sign Victor Gyokeres that's better than Jonathan David at literally everything, because you're going to be playing low blocks, and Victor Gyokeres isn't an aerial threat to the liking of Tom Garrat. But they should go sign Jonathan David, who's worse at everything and also isn't an aerial threat. I just don't even understand that thought process. Let's get the guy with worse movement, worse finishing ability, less physicality, because he scored one-headed goal and Arsenal are going to be playing against low blocks. It makes no sense. So he'll never tell you his legitimate reason for why there should be Jonathan David over Victor Gyokeres, because it makes no sense. He just wants to spew out a talking point. But now I want to transition into this next clip where he kind of does the typical narrative of the Portuguese to England pipeline. So just listen in real quick.
I know he's done it in Portugal.
And so, mate, I could give you
Champions League as well.
I could give you 100 players who've done it in Portugal.
But he's done it in the Champions League.
Look at Darwin Núñez.
No, but he's done it in the Champions.
As you could see from that clip, firstly, I would just like to dispute the Darwin Núñez take because I've seen it a bunch recently. Núñez was a winger turned striker at Benfica, whose first year in the Portuguese league, he scored 6 goals at the age of 21. He then had a really good season for Benfica at the age of 22, where he scored 26 goals, and he had that great UCL campaign. I think it was a hat-trick against Barcelona. But he was still seen as a relatively raw and unproven talent. When he was purchased by Liverpool, it was seen as a huge overpay by anyone who was watching him week in and week out, either if you watch the Portuguese league or you're just a Benfiquista. The reality was that it was a high-risk, hopefully higher-reward transfer made by Liverpool. You are getting a physical specimen with insane movement, work ethic, pressing ability, with an eye for goal, and always seems to be in the right spot at the right moment. He even still is for Liverpool. That's not his issue at Liverpool. But there was always questions around his finishing, which Liverpool see a striker that has every single intangible other than the finishing. They're hoping that he can come and they'll train him up to improve the finishing ability. And then ultimately that would make him a top 5 striker in the world. And then it would be their striker problem solved for the next 10 years. It ended up not going that way, but he wasn't as bad as people try to act. And he was never really given a chance to gain full rhythm, as he was constantly in and out of the starting 11. Over the last 3 years, Darwin Núñez had 95 appearances made for Liverpool and contributed around 40 goals. 40 goals and assists. That isn't the output of someone who can't adapt and can't play in the Prem. That is just the narrative strictly because of the fee that was paid for him. And he's nothing like Bas Dost. I've also been seeing Darwin Núñez and Bas Dost. Bas Dost had 2 decent seasons in the Portuguese league back when it was a much lower quality league, and he then moved to Frankfurt, which isn't a high quality team. They're actually better now, but back in 2016, 2017, 2018, they weren't as high quality as they are now. There's a reason why he went from Sporting to Eintracht Frankfurt, and Núñez is being targeted still by teams like Napoli, who are in the Champions League. So there's an obvious difference there. So that comparison just makes no sense. And now to focus in on just the hypocrisy of pointing out players like Dost and Ricky van Wolfswinkel, but not players like Raul Jimenez and Evan Nielsen and Diogo Jota. Jimenez was actually scoring less goals while at Benfica and started scoring more goals when he went to the Prem. So can we now say that the Prem is worse because we have one example of someone actually improving their goal-scoring output when switching leagues? And I just want to get that out there. It's not like there is always this huge gulf in quality between the Portuguese league and other leagues. PSG just won the treble where their midfield was João Neves and Vitinha, and their star left back is Nuno Mendes, all from the Portuguese league. They were dominating. That midfield was ran through Vitinha and João Neves. Those are Portuguese league players. There isn't this gulf in quality. And you can name a bunch of other players. Enzo is a great player who's at Chelsea now, Portuguese league. Ruben Diaz, Bruno Fernandes, where they talk about, does the goal scoring translate back to the Premier League? Bruno Fernandes has been scoring 20 plus goals a season for Manchester United. Gonçalo Ramos, João Neves, like I said, Luis Diaz, who just had a great season, just scored around 15 goals in the Premier League for Liverpool. James Rodriguez, Pedro Porro, Nuno Mendes, Pepe, Contrao, Nani, CR7. We don't even have to get into CR7. There's players that have made the transition from the Portuguese league to other leagues seamlessly and flawlessly. So please don't just point out the players like Bas Dost or Ricky van Wolfswinkel. You have to add context. So please think about that a bit more. And I also just want to point out the stark difference, because there is a lot of discussion about how Núñez wasn't great at Liverpool and that how Liverpool were as great as Liverpool were hoping, and that is not a comparison to be made with Victor Gyokeres. Please understand not only are these extremely different types of players, the transfers are also at very different points of their career. Nunes was 22 when he went to Liverpool, had one good season as a striker, and was seen as a raw talent with still a lot of things that needed to be refined. Gyokeres is 27 and seen as a finished product that is expected to come and instantly contribute to whatever team he comes to. Gyokeres' worst season at Sporting was better than Darwin Núñez's best season at Benfica. Darwin's best season at Benfica was 26 goals. Gyokeres' worst season at Sporting was 29 goals. And then the following season, he scored 39. He also scored 20-plus goals at Coventry the year prior as well. These aren't the same level of transfers. These aren't the same level of the career that each player is at. Darwin came to the Prem a lot more raw and a lot younger. Gyokeres is coming at 27, a lot more refined. And now I kind of want to get into the clip where he talks about all of his goals are in transition, and they always refer to the Manchester City game. So why would you sign a striker that's so great in transition when every team plays a low block?
It's all a bit unknown.
Gyokeres is another one. All his goals come in transition or penalties. Like Arsenal have 90% of the ball every game.
Okay, from that clip, you could see Tom Garrat do the amazingly obvious thing of bringing up how Gyokeres, he scored that hat-trick against Manchester City, but all of his goals were in transition, and Arsenal don't play against teams in transition. Every team has a low block. All of his goals aren't in transition. He plays for a top 2 side in the Portuguese league that dominate possession and dominate the chances. You are talking about random highlights you have seen against teams that are better than Sporting, like Manchester City, where they don't have possession and he is scoring in transition. That is not how he is scoring week in and week out. And I, for one, would love a striker that can do both. Havertz struggles in transition. He is in the 40th percentile for successful take-ons and the 66th percentile for progressive carries. He shies away from the transitional part of the game, but is a great aerial threat. Gyokeres is great in transition, and when Arsenal dominate, and he can also be great when Arsenal dominate possession. And also, I don't see people talking about this because there is such a heavy focus on the league. I think because Arsenal's finished second in the league the last 3 seasons. But this is a great signing for Arsenal's Champions League campaign where they just went to the semifinals. We just saw PSG win the Champions League solely off of having attackers who are great at taking the defenders on one-on-one and creating chances for themselves. That is something Victor Gyokeres is amazing at, but something Havertz really struggles at. Now Arsenal have a front 3 that are demons in transition. They have Gyokeres, they have Saka, they have Martinelli, while also having the large aerial threat, late runners, and creativity from players like Declan Rice and Odegaard, and an overlapping Urian Timber or Ben White, or Martin Lewis-Skelly inverting into the midfield and being able to get a nice through ball into somebody that's making a late one. They now have every type of solution. You want aerial ability, you have Havertz, you have Declan Rice, you have players coming in late from midfield. You want amazing transitional ability, amazing transitional threat while you're in the Champions League. You now have Victor Gyokeres to go along with Gabriel Martinelli. This is a great signing. And I also just want to point out, yes, do teams go up against Arsenal in low blocks and try to fight for a point? Of course. You are acting like every point of the game, the team is in a low block. There are going to still be chances in a game and points in a game where you are going up against a team that is in a low block, where they take the ball, they go on their own transition, they try to score, you now recover the ball, and they are in their own defensive transitional period, where someone like Victor Gyokeres now is not going up against a low block, even though you're going up against Burnley, and he has the chance to run at a defender and score in transition. This is so important.